This video covers an entire year in the process of growing garlic, from putting the cloves in the ground to harvest, to saving new cloves and starting the whole process over again. Hi, I'm GardenerScott. I'm a master gardener and I discuss everything gardening so that you can become a better gardener. Today, let me show you how to grow garlic. Today I'm going to harvest my garlic. The process began 9 months ago, and I'm going to show you every step in the process. So let's go ahead and jump back 9 months. Hi, I'm GardenerScott, and today is one of my most favorite days of the year. It's the day I plant garlic. For me, it's the beginning of October, which is perfect for my Zone 5 garden. Garlic takes 8 to 9 months to grow, from putting the clove in the ground to harvesting the bulb. And I'll be showing you that entire process. You should grow garlic in a spot that gets at least 6 hours of sun each day. And the more, the better. The soil should be as rich as possible and as loose as possible. You really don't want a compacted soil because the individual garlic cloves, as they grow into bulbs, need to expand. So a looser soil will allow those cloves to expand much easier. I'm going to plant garlic throughout this entire bed, 12 different varieties. And much of it will be used next October for the following year's plants. But a lot of it's also going to be used in my kitchen. To get the best results, I like to lay out the garlic in a grid pattern 6 inches apart from every individual clove. That's about 15 centimeters. So I begin by putting my plant tags 6 inches apart to identify where the rows are going to be. And then, as I lay out the individual cloves, I'll place them 6 inches apart. As I get ready to plant, I'll break apart the bulb to release the individual cloves inside. And I'll just continue separating these bulbs into individual cloves for planting first, because I do like to have everything spread out. So I'll just go down the line and get the cloves ready to go. The number of cloves will vary by the different types of garlic. But at this point I'll just separate out the cloves, and that'll give me an idea of how many I'll have to plant in each row. It looks like I got 6 from this mulching. The mulching is a hardneck variety of garlic. This inchlium red is a soft neck. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 cloves from this single bulb. As I get ready to lay the cloves out for putting them in their final hole, I want to pick the best cloves for planting. Now, back to this mulching. It's a hard neck, and all of the cloves are basically the same size. So I'll plant all of these. But with this inchlium red, I get cloves of different sizes based on where they are in the bulb. So I'll try to focus on these bigger cloves for planting. And if I don't need them, I'll save these smaller cloves to actually use in the kitchen. These bigger bulbs will grow into a much bigger and better bulb next year. If you come across any cloves that are really damaged or look like they're starting to rot, or maybe they're very dried out, well, don't even attempt to plant these cloves. They're best just to throw in the compost pile. And if you come across any that look like they have little eggs inside, maybe little spiderweb looking filaments, don't even throw these in the compost pile. These go into the trash. You don't want to introduce any pests into next year's garlic crop. As I lay out the cloves, I'll actually stagger the rows. So when I start a new row, I'll make sure that the cloves actually run about at the halfway point between the previous clove spacing. You want to bury the cloves at least twice as deep as the clove is tall. So for a clove that is 1.5 inches or about 4 centimeters, you want to bury it in a hole that's 3 inches deep, or about 7.5 centimeters deep. In a bed like this, where I have everything precisely measured, I will have some cloves left over. Those little ones that I don't think will grow into very good plants will definitely go into the kitchen to be used for cooking. But I do have some robust cloves that can grow into great plants, and I'll actually spread them throughout the garden. They can be a great aid to you and your pest control, because garlic growing alongside many other plants can actually deter some of the pests that you're trying to get rid of already. There are 3 basic methods that I use to plant these cloves. When you look at the clove, you'll notice one of the tips is definitely flat and one of the tips is definitely pointed. It's like a little rocket ship. You want the flat piece to be down and you want this pointy piece to be up. One way to plant the cloves, if you've got a lot in a row, is to dig a trench. I like to use a trowel that's got measurements on it just to be sure that I'm getting the proper depth. So I'll dig the trench down to the point where I want the clove base to be. And then when it comes time, I just lay the cloves into the trench. And then cover up the cloves. And this row is now planted. The row method is pretty effective if you're planting a border of garlic or putting them in some other section of your yard. But for a bed like this, where I want everything specifically spaced, it doesn't work as well, particularly as you start going into the middle of the bed, because the rows create soil going out in all directions. So I prefer one of the other 2 methods when I plant like this. For precision, and this is why I like to use a trowel with measurements, I can push the trowel into the soil to the proper depth, just pull it aside, and then stick the clove in the bottom of that hole. And I can just go down the row, making sure each of these cloves is perfectly spaced. The third method is to make holes ahead of time. Just punch a grid of holes into the soil, drop the clove, and cover it up, and you'll be ready to go. And I used to do that using round wooden pieces, wooden dowels, that were measured to the proper depth. And I would just poke a hole and then drop the cloves in. But I started to be a little concerned about soil compaction. If I'm pushing that piece of wood into the ground, well, then it's compacting as I push it in. And right where the roots are growing, that's going to be the most compacted soil in that hole. So since then, I've developed this method, which is to use a hollow piece. This is PVC. It's used in irrigation, like in a sprinkler system for a lawn. And what I'll do is push this into the ground to the proper depth. And when I pull it out, I'm usually left with a plug of soil inside this hollow piece. And I can just knock it out. And then I can place the clove into this hole that I've dug and cover it up. And for me, this works pretty well. If the soil is mostly moist, you can just do your series of holes and be all ready to go to drop your cloves in. Because I've grown a lot of garlic over the years, and I've done this quite a bit, what I find works best for me is to just dig a hole, drop in the clove, dig a hole, drop in the clove, and just continue on, always being sure to keep the pointy side up. And because I've got the measurements on the trowel, I can make sure that I'm going down to the exact depth that I'm looking for. And this works pretty well. I can be pretty fast with this, but you can be free to choose whichever method you like best. I'm also growing elephant garlic. Now, it's not technically a garlic, it's a leek, but it tastes like garlic and looks like garlic. And it gets quite large. This is a single clove, which is about as big as some of the other bulbs before I broke them apart. Because this is bigger, it needs to be planted deeper, twice the height. We also need to give more room for the bulb to develop. So I'm spacing this row of elephant garlic at least 8 inches away from the other rows. And I'm hoping to get some nice, robust bulbs of elephant garlic. With everything planted, now we take the time to water it in very well. A really nice, deep watering. With the bed well watered, now it's time to add a thick layer of mulch. Now, I like to use straw. You could easily use dried grass, dried leaves, even small wood chips. You want to put some protection on the soil. The garlic is actually going to start putting out roots pretty quickly if we keep this bed watered. Even if it's cold outside, even if it's snowy, the roots will continue to grow. And this mulch just really helps keep the temperature as warm as possible, as long as possible. It also helps protect it over the winter because this garlic's going to be in the ground for 9 months. In the spring, when the weather warms up, it's going to pop back into that growth cycle. It's strong enough to punch up through all of this mulch, which is perfectly fine. That's why I like a lighter mulch, to make it easier. And in the spring, this is also like a blanket. It helps keep the soil warmer so that that garlic can continue to grow. And to help keep the mulch in place, I'll give it another really thorough watering. And this will help the mulch settle down onto the soil. The garlic's in the ground, and I'll treat it just like any other seed. I'll continue to water to keep the soil evenly moist. And it won't be long before those little cloves start sending out roots. And the roots will grow until the soil is frozen. So I need to make sure that as long as the days are warm, I'm out here watering. Periodically, I'll come out and I'll stick my finger into the bed. If it's excessively dry, even during winter, I'll add some water because I don't want those cloves drying out. They'll go dormant over the winter, but I don't want them to desiccate. So winter watering may be necessary if I don't get a lot of snow. In the spring, I'll be looking for the new green growth. As soon as the soil thaws out, the garlic's going to pop up. In the spring, just keep watering the garlic like you would any other plant. Add additional mulch as necessary to keep the soil covered, and the plants will grow fine. And you'll start to notice on the hardneck varieties that scapes will develop. These are the little vertical curly cues that are completely edible, very tasty. I'm not trying to show off, but this is exactly what your garlic should look like. It should be tall, dark green, and the scapes should start developing on these hardneck varieties. This curly cue that develops on the hardneck starts off with a nice big curve, but it'll straighten up as it grows. That straight scape is a good indication that the plant is getting close to harvest. The garlic plants will tell you when it's time to harvest. You'll start seeing browning leaves at the base of the plant. The hardneck varieties will stay erect, but you'll notice 3, 4, 5, then 6 leaves begin to brown and dry. That's a really good indication that it's time to harvest. The hardneck varieties also will have their scapes grow vertically. Now, I do encourage that you cut the scapes when they're young, when they're still in that curly shape, because they're delicious and there are a number of ways you can eat them. But I allowed these plants to go vertically so that you could see what they look like, and also so that I can show you some pictures of what the garlic seed actually looks like. And you can save this seed and plant it if you leave the garlic in the ground and allow some of the seeds to develop. The softneck varieties of garlic will also brown, but those plants will typically begin to fall over. They won't stay erect. In either case, what you're looking for is what looks like the plant's dying. When you see the drying of the leaves, it's often a good idea to go ahead and just do a test. Go ahead and dig up a few of the bulbs to see how they're developing. And this actually looks pretty good. The bulb's not huge, that's okay, but it's intact and it looks like it's ready to harvest. The leaves turning brown on the garlic plants tell us that it's getting close, because each of those dried leaves correspond to a layer of the protective covering over the individual cloves. You know, when you cut the bulb and that papery outer shell is something that you pull off, well, that papery outer shell corresponds to each of these leaves. And we want it to be intact around the cloves. It's protection. That's why we're waiting until the point that we've guessed the maturity of the bulb by looking at the leaves. Now, this test dig shows us that in this case, yes, the bulb is mature, the cloves are being protected, and we're very close to harvest. So the next step is to actually leave the garlic in the ground for a few days and stop watering, because we want this outer shell to begin to harden, to protect the bulb. If we harvest everything when everything is still wet, you run the risk of actually tearing or breaking this outer shell, and your bulbs won't store as long as they might otherwise be able to. So let the ground dry out a little bit before you proceed with the rest of the harvest. And one way to harvest pretty efficiently is with a garden fork. And I'll just place this in the soil and leverage out all of those garlic bulbs. You can do this with a shovel or a spade, but I find the fork to be very effective. And so what I do is loosen the soil and then reach down and pull out the individual bulbs. You really don't want to grab and pull, because you can pull the stalk away from the plant. So once the soil is loosened, it becomes really easy to harvest. And now I'll just reach down and lay all of these bulbs as I continue the harvest. I find the garlic fork most efficient if you're growing all of the same type of garlic. Now, I've got 12 different varieties here, and I'm planning on saving some of the cloves to replant for next year's garden. And I don't want to get them all mixed up by just coming in with a fork or a spade and digging up all the bulbs. So I'm going to use a trowel, And now, even though it takes longer, I'm going to go through and dig up each of these bulbs individually, just so I can keep track of which variety is which. As you dig up the cloves, go ahead and try to brush off as much of the soil as you can. But you don't want to be too rough on the individual bulb, because remember, this protective layer is still relatively soft. We want it to dry out. So I'm just going to get most of the soil off of the roots, and for now, this bulb looks clean enough. And as you continue to dig up your bulbs, just lay them on the surface of your bed. The sun will help them dry out, giving it that protection. It'll also dry out the soil, making it easier to brush off. If you choose to leave it on the surface, be sure that there's no rain in the forecast for a couple days. And that's all you need. It's just 2 days so that the sun can help cure those outer layers of the garlic. That will give it good protection for good long storage. I'm going with another option, and that's the same basic concept to cure the garlic, allow those outer layers to dry, but I'm doing it inside. So I've just laid all the garlic out on newspaper, and I'm going to wait for about 2 or 3 days for the garlic to cure before I clean it any further. After 2 days of sitting upstairs on newspaper, I went ahead and cut off the stalks and tried to brush off as much of the dirt as possible. And then I came downstairs, laid it out on newspaper again, and I've waited another 3 days for it to dry some more to finish cleaning it up. I set aside some of the garlic in my kitchen. And all this that's down here, I left all the plant tags so I know which is which. And I'll just try to pull off any remaining dirt, trim the roots, and try to clean up this garlic as good as possible for storage between now and when I plant these cloves back in the ground. And here's a trick I learned from my gardening buddy Larry, to go ahead and write the name of the garlic in permanent marker right on the bulb. So now I don't have to worry about these getting mixed up and separated from the plant tag. When it comes time to plant, I know this is chestnut red and I'm all ready to go. And now I'll put the cleaned, trimmed, labeled garlic in a box along with plant tags that I can reuse. Put it in a cool, dry, dark spot for about the next 2 months until I'm ready to put these back in my garden and start it all over again. The garlic will easily store for 2 to 3 months between when I label the bulbs to when I put the cloves back in again for next year's crop. And during that 2 to 3 month time period, well, I have plenty of time to scope out my garden and figure out where I'm going to plant garlic again. I think it's probably going to be this bed. I have some squash and cucumbers growing in it now. I've been getting some great harvests, many more harvests to come. But in about a month, I'm going to get my first freeze, and it's going to kill these plants. Well, when these plants are dead, I'll pull them out, I'll revitalize the soil, add more organic material, and then it's ready for planting again. It's ready for garlic. So you've seen the whole cycle, how we can start with cloves, get all the way to harvest, save our bulbs, and then plant all over again. So once you find a variety you like, or a garlic that does really well in your area, well, try this. Start to finish and over again, and you'll have garlic for as long as you have a garden. I hope you learned something in this video, and if you did, well then consider subscribing to the GardenerScott channel if you haven't already done so, and do click on the bell so you know when new videos are coming out. And be sure and share this video with other garlic growers you know who might be interested. I'm GardenerScott. Enjoy gardening.